Hello, how are you? How are you? Thank you very good. Much for coming in. I told some folks I would do some algae information here tonight. I appreciate you coming in. I really do. Thank you. I'll wait for a few more folks. Can you hear me pretty good? Thank you, Joseph Erickson. Where are you from? I hope the folks show up. Where are you from, Joseph? We have two in the chat. Well, hello. Thank you for coming in, Strawberry. I was waiting on at least 5 to 10 come in. I think Joseph wanted me to grow everybody's channel tonight. But it's all good. I kind of did that this morning. I talked about the subject that I ran across an article, how the algae is blooming up and killing dogs. So I said I would do a story tonight. Hello, just went. Speak and they will come. Okay, let me get started. Toxic algae blooms really have become more intense. Fallout shelter. I'll repeat the title here. Toxic algae blooms really have become more intense. A new study out Monday seems to confirm an unpleasant reality. Potentially toxic algae blooms. In the world's freshwater lakes have become more intense over the last 30 years. And while climate change may not be the only reason why blooms have gotten worse, rising temperatures are likely, making it harder for lakes to recover. Let me read on. For their study, researchers from Stanford University and NASA used data from the Landsat 5 near Earth satellite, which orbited and took pictures of the Earth's surface for nearly 30 years until it was decommissioned in 2013. Then they used a computer algorithm borrowed from Google Earth engine to identify algae blooms in the world's largest lakes. Better data is available for more recent years from instruments such as MARIS and MODIS. Study author Anna Michalak, a senior researcher at Stanford Carnegie Institution for Science. The goal here, however, was to get the longest possible record using a single approach, both across time and across a large number of lakes worldwide. Overall, to study algae trends in 71 large lakes located across 33 countries and on 6 continents. They found that in 68% of the lakes, the peak summertime intensity of blooms got worse, while the intensity of blooms only decreased in 8% of lakes during the same time. The same pattern was true for a particularly dangerous type of algae made of bacteria called blue-green algae, which can be toxic to wildlife, pets, and people. The findings published in Nature Monday provide more evidence that toxic blooms really are becoming more widespread across the globe and countered the hypothesis that increased reporting of toxic blooms is instead a byproduct of increased scientific attention, the authors wrote. While there seems to be a link between climate change and these blooms, though the relationship is complicated, Michalak and her co-authors didn't spot a consistent association between warming temperatures and the chance of more intense blooms across lakes globally. What that likely means is that algae blooms can be affected by many different factors, depending on an individual lake's environment. And while these factors can include temperature, it can also include rainfall or fertilizer. However, one consistent finding is that only lakes that warmed less cooled were able to sustain gains in water quality. In other words, even if climate change isn't making blooms in one particular lake more common, it'll still make trying to manage them a nightmare for scientists and governments across the world. Already, the authors noted algae blooms in the U.S. are thought to cost the country $4 billion annually, thanks to the damage they can cause to an area's drinking water, agriculture, and tourism. They also can be deadly as a wave of pet deaths over the summer linked to blue-green algae demonstrated this year. I wanted to get to that next. One key takeaway from the study is that tackling climate change will also benefit us in many other ways, such as safeguarding water quality. A second takeaway, she added, is that water management strategies need to take into account the fact that temperatures and rainfall are changing. Doing so will increase the chance of the success of those strategies. They want to blame climate change. All right, let me go up here and click on where algae is causing dogs and animal death. There seems to be a little proof of it. I'm not sure. Thank you all for being here. A dangerous algae is killing our dogs, and climate change is going to make it worse, they say. I'm just reading the articles by Gizmodo. I'm sure things are linked to the damage that these chemtrails are causing and things that they're also doing to our economy. I'm sure it's not just our SUVs. Here's a pair of tragic stories, they say. Above here in the picture, a blue-green algae bloom, and one of its unfortunate victims, a dead fish. I don't think you can see it. Let me get to where we can see it. Sorry about that. I have to share the next screen. I like to do a story every now and then, you know? Makes me a little better on the computer. Sorry about that. I clicked away the dang last picture. All right, here we go. As you see to the right, a blue-green algae bloom. And one of its unfortunate victims, there's a little fish there on the bottom right. Let me get to the story, please. Thank you all for coming in. As we all know, algae is getting worse in our lakes, our streams, the ocean. A pair of tragic stories reported this past weekend is raising awareness of a threat to both people and animals in the water. Algae. It always starts when I start. At least 4 dogs in 2 states along the southeast U.S. have reportedly died from swimming in freshwater lakes and ponds filled with toxic blue-green algae. And as the climate warms, these sad cases could become more common in the U.S. and elsewhere. I wanted you to see that picture there real good. A moment in time there. Blue-green algae. In a Facebook post early last Friday, North Carolina resident Melissa Martin said she and her friend Denise Mintz had taken their 3 dogs, Abby, Izzy, and Harpo, for a Thursday night swim at a local pond. But within minutes of leaving, Abby began suffering a seizure. And though all 3 were quickly taken to a veterinary hospital, none survived. According to her veterinarian, Martin wrote, they had died from algae poisoning. The same basic story would soon repeat itself in Georgia. In a Facebook post published Saturday, Morgan Fleming recounted how her dog, Aria, had playfully swam in their local lake all day, only to start throwing up and being unable to stand soon after they left. By the time Aria was taken to the ER, she had lost consciousness. She died soon after. Fleming, like Martin, blamed the death on blue-green algae. At this point, the cause of death for all 4 dogs remained unconfirmed, pending a possible autopsy or investigation of the water source. But these wouldn't be the first deaths linked to algae swarm. Blue-green algae is something of a misnomer. Most things we consider algae are plants or very closely related to plants, like species of seaweed, but it's microscopic critters called cyanobacteria that make up blue-green algae. Like plants, those cyanobacteria do use the sun to nourish themselves. In small quantities, algae typically isn't harmful to wildlife or humans. But when the feeding conditions are right, they can quickly grow into giant blooms. It's these algae blooms, characterized by the vivid, viscous discolorations of water they create. They can spew enough toxins into the water to seriously harm or kill animals unlikely to come across them. Dogs might be more susceptible to algae poisoning, given their smaller bodies. But humans are at risk also. A 2014 study from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found there had been at least 11 outbreaks of illnesses caused by algae in the U.S. between 2009 and 2010. As you see, they go so far back, they're not telling us updated information, which collectively sickened 61 people and left 2 hospitalized. Out of these outbreaks were traced to fresh water. Most were clearly linked to blue-green algae. And some happened alongside a wave of nearby animal deaths, including dogs. A study by New York health officials in 2017, also published by the CDC, documented 51 cases of algae-related illness among people and dogs during 2015. People also have been sickened by algae blooms in the ocean, such as the red tide, events that periodically plague Florida's coast. Most recent national data on how often these blooms are hurting people and animals is limited. A national voluntary surveillance system was rebooted by the CDC in 2016, but the CDC has declared algae blooms as an emerging public health issue. And though the effects of climate change on algae populations and other disease causing things like ticks are complex, It's likely that warmer temperatures have contributed to a growing increase in the potency of algae blooms in the recent years. That's especially true for blue-green algae, since it thrives in warm, fresh water. Even the Environmental Protection Agency, which has been reluctant to discuss climate impacts under the Trump administration, still says as much for the time being. Some states do have their own surveillance programs for algae, including North Carolina. But Martin said she didn't see any warnings for the pond she and her unlucky dogs visited. She did not see any signs of algae. In honor of their loved canines, Martin and others have started an already successful GoFundMe, and they say will raise funds to post signs in front of any sources of water that could be contaminated with algae. I will not stop until I make a positive change, Martin told CNN. I will not lose my dogs for nothing. There was one more story here. Not all blooms are toxic, however, and we still don't know what causes them to start producing the toxin genes E and Massey. Nutrients in the water seem to be the largest factor. Nitrogen and phosphorus. Though the increase in blooms does seem to correlate with increasing global temperatures. Most states are barely starting to test drinking water sources from these blooms. Forget about recreational waters. Ask your state representatives to do something about monitoring, but expect progress to be slow. The tests are expensive regardless of method. And doing that for a whole state will mean lots of spending on supplies and personnel to test. Most things we consider algae are plants or very closely related to plants, like species of seaweed. Here, I'll read this last two paragraphs. No plants are multicellular and mostly terrestrial. Algae are single-celled or multicellular. Protist multicellular forms like red and brown algae are about as close to plants as we are. In any case, the closest group of algae to the plants is Chlorophyceae. The rest are pretty distant in the evolutionary sense. Just because it's got chloroplast and photosynthesis doesn't mean it's a plant. Worth mentioning that blue-green algae are prokaryotes and thus even more distantly related to all other photosynthesizing groups. Us and plants are cousins compared to us, plants, and blue-green algae. Algae blooms are definitely getting worse. In lakes, ponds, and the red tide. I saw an article a while ago on the red tide. Here it is. I think I have to click off the last story. Yeah, it gets a little differently. There's even a video. Excuse me. I have to share the screen all over again. I'm just going through these stories. I thank y'all for being here for real. I don't know who's here. I can't really see the screen, but I have to cut the volume down on this video. Yeah, I'll let the video play if I can get the volume down quick. Y'all quit knocking on the door there. All right, I got the volume down. Welcome to Florida. Here's a video of the red tide and what it's doing to natural resources, the fish. Look at the fish, the red tide. I don't want the sound on so I don't get a copyright, you know? I hope everyone can hear me. But yes, this video is about the red tide in Florida. All the places are showing up there on the West Coast. I'm not sure who's in the chat. I can't see the chat, but I thank you all for being here. Yes for one, two for no. As we know, red tide can cause respiratory problems in people and animals, but that's probably not the only thing it's causing. Here's a short video of some of the effects of the red tide in Florida. Blue-green algae in our water supplies. I'm not listening to the video, so the sound don't give me a copyright strike, but it's all good. Look how it damages the water, just the beauty of the water, you know? It's getting into nutrients in the water. It's killing off plant life at the bottom of the sea. It's killing off turtles and fish, the red tide, the algae in the waters. It's crazy, isn't it? And they want to act like they don't know what it is. They want to blame it probably on our SUVs. Wow, it looks pretty bad there. All fake news. What we see isn't fake. We see the red tide and we see the algae in the water. But yeah, the information they give us and what's causing it is fake news. They know who's causing it. It's sad when you see millions and millions of fish washing ashore and dying. I'm going to find one day where they're dumping sulfur in our oceans, because I remember like 6 years ago that I heard the story about it. They are dumping sulfur. That's probably what's causing the red tide. Isn't it obvious? Red tide, sulfur is red. I don't know how long this video goes on. Let me read the article. This is by Gazebo. It's filed to Algae. The shape of things to come in U.S. politics could be decided. That's part of the problem. They get politics involved. In no small part by foul-smelling fish killing slime. Florida is in the grips of algae, a crisis of epic proportions. Look at there. Let's go back to the video a second. Dead fish showing up all over the coast. Wow, there's a bad problem of algae in that picture. I know that. When the water turns green, you notice that blue-green algae. Lake Okeechobee, around Fort Myers and Fort Lauderdale and Stewart. To the right of Florida is where that nuclear plant. Florida is in the grips of an algae crisis of epic proportions. Pollution and water management issues have triggered bloom after bloom of blue-green algae on the ginormous Lake Okeechobee, the beating heart of the state's water system. When water is released from the lake via drinkage canals, the stinky, slimy gunk creeps into rivers and estuaries, mucking up coastlines and sickening residents. Meanwhile, a separate algae outbreak, starring the saltwater loving Carenia brevis, has laid siege to Florida's southwest coast, killing tens of thousands of fish, as well as manatees, sea turtles, and dolphins. The so-called red tide bloom currently spans some 135 miles off coastline, and it shows no signs of stopping. Both blue-green algae and red tide are naturally occurring organisms. But as Arthur learned when we traveled to Florida to speak with experts and see the blooms for ourselves, today's algae crisis has human fingerprints all over it. It's deeply intertwined with development, agriculture, and politics. Solving it will ultimately require a vast overhaul of how Florida moves and uses water, and a concession that the decision to tame and drain America's largest swamp nearly a century ago carried some unintended consequences. They come up with anything, don't they? I just read what this information, some of it's correct. A little common sense about the microorganisms and how deadly that the algae can be. If one thing's certain, is that Floridians are sick of algae, and its death-like stench will be fresh in folks' memories as they head to the polls in November. Here we go. They want to make it political. Like the next one can save us from this, Republican Governor Rick Scott is leaving his post to make a run at Democratic Senator Bill Nelson's seat. And whoever wins could well decide the majority in the Senate. Okay. Both have blamed the other's politics for the algae crisis. Here we go. With a bunch of opportunistic microbes have an outside voice this election. I don't really care. But as we see, we have a growing algae problem across the whole United States. It's in our lakes, it's in our rivers, it's all over the place. It's in the oceans. Let me see if that video up here is playing all over or still playing. I can't really see the chat. I'd have to click on my phone. But there's a story back 20 minutes ago, how it's killing dogs in the ponds. Y'all be careful, please. Don't just get any pond water, river, or lakes. I remember one lake, they said it had that brain-eating bacteria, like a meningitis. And the bacteria will go up your nose and it'll get in your brain. The water is not safe anymore, y'all. It's just not the algae. Which, of course, the heat of the summertime, is heating up the water, and it causes bacteria and germs to get worse. And I wanted to do the short story tonight. I saw a while ago where somebody put these two suckers live on YouTube in their mouth. And I just did a story last week where this man ate these hot cakes. And they burned his throat so bad it swallowed. 12 hours later, the man died. You have to be careful, y'all. Take care of yourselves. The growing algae problems. You can't just eat anything or stick out. Be safe. Make sure you're drinking clean water.